This sketchnote has been developed as a secondary representation of the narrative behind our presentation given at the UDL-IRN Summit for 2019 in Orlando, Florida, titled Breaking Down the Myth of Average in the Land Down Under, the Soft Peaks to Softball Analogy. Inclusion and inclusive practices are contested concepts within the context of personal development, health and physical education, PDHPE, in Australia, particularly in relation to the curriculum development process and enactment of that curriculum by schools. In 2014, the Australian Curriculum Health and Physical Education was released for implementation across the country. This national curriculum was developed using the UDL principles to ensure that it was inclusive of all learners. In Australia, the term curriculum specifically refers to the content and achievement standards for each subject that have been developed by an education authority. Teachers use the curriculum to develop their own teaching and assessment experiences. Realising the benefits of inclusion in physical education can be challenging when some HPE teachers value existing practices and do not believe that there is a need to change. Along with this, deficit discourses of disability are common in relation to participation in physical education, physical activity, and sport, and can limit the potential for working towards inclusion, particularly for students who have a physical disability. Many HPE teachers continue to value particular kinds of activities and abilities in physical education. Such values create barriers for students with varied movement abilities to be included, feeling valued as learners, and having their learning needs met. In order to challenge these barriers, it was important to provide an alternative discourse that recognised all abilities as valued in the physical education class. Some HPE teachers report that they do not feel confident or feel sufficiently experienced or skilled to adjust activities or their teaching style in order to cater for the learning variabilities in their physical education classes. In 2018, the State of New South Wales, Australia, released their interpretation of the Australian Curriculum for Health PE as a new syllabus. With the release of the new syllabus comes an amazing opportunity to start new conversations and critically reflect on current practices. To support teachers with their implementation of the syllabus and their planning of their school-based programs, a series of statewide professional learning workshops were presented during second semester 2018. These workshops focused on taking participants through a process for developing high-quality, inclusive programs for HPE. In developing the programming processes to be modelled in the workshops, we consciously adhered to Novak's advice that UDL isn't something you can just do. UDL is what your practice becomes when you shift the way you think about teaching and learning. The programming processes we will share in this session support teachers to plan for a buffet of options in their lessons that allow students to self-select the supports they require to meet the learning goals of the unit. The options are offered by the teacher, but they aren't individualised for specific students, just as you would when planning a dinner party, as advised by Katie Novak. Through these offerings, students are encouraged to become self-directed learners and choose the options that work best for them, rather than the teacher determining what they will do to learn. By using the Universal Design for Learning framework, Todd Rose's concept of the jagged learner profile, we are encouraging teachers to get to know their edges. A similar concept is used by Shelley Moore in her 10-pin bowling analogy, where she promotes designing learning experiences that cater for the outside pins. By supporting teachers to understand the learner variability in their classes, we have begun to disrupt the common practice of HPE teachers to plan a one-size-fits-all program that is programmed for the average student. That, as Rose will tell us, doesn't exist. In order to unpack the programming process further for teachers, we developed our own analogy, with an Australian flavour. The analogy we developed for shifting this thinking starts with a popular Australian dessert, the pavlova. The pavlova allows us to explore the concept of variability through individuals' differing experiences with this meringue-based dessert. If you don't know how to separate the egg white from the yolk, you will never successfully whip them into soft peaks. The next step is to mirror the big idea of making a meringue with the big idea in PE of successfully scoring in a softball-inspired game, meringue-based dessert. The goal of making a pavlova challenges thinking in relation to an end product versus the learning that needs to take place, the big idea. Separating eggs and whisking the whites into soft peaks gives us the opportunity to illustrate how choice, flexibility, and supports can still lead to the same end goal. For the meringue making lesson, the big idea is that egg whites can be separated from the yolk and whisked to form a dessert. For the softball striking lesson, the big idea is that a ball can be hit into space in order to score in a game. If we unpack these big ideas into the learning intentions and knowledge required for both the meringue and softball lesson, again we see the parallels across the two learning experiences. The simple analogy allows teachers to see the parallels between supports required for all learners to successfully make a meringue with the supports which can be used to allow all learners to access the same big idea and learning goals in a softball context. By unpacking the analogy using video artifacts of both the meringue making and softball processes, we demonstrate how flexibility, choice, and supports can be incorporated into the design of lessons without sacrificing the authenticity of the learning or individual student's achievement. So, in summarising the key messages from our presentation, when planning learning activities, first, the overarching learning goals are the same for all students. Second, barriers to achieving goals are identified and supports put in place to ensure all students reach the same learning goal. Third, allow students to choose how to complete each step and what supports they will access. And finally, provide opportunities for students to test options to work out what best works for them. The first challenge is to build an understanding amongst PDHPE teachers of the learner variabilities that exist within a typical PE class. The first challenge is to build an understanding amongst PDHPE teachers of the learner variabilities that exist within a typical PE class. By building an understanding of the edges, teachers will be better able to identify the potential barriers the activity may pose for learners when introducing new movement skills and concepts. The second challenge is to reconceptualize what teachers believe achievement looks like in PE. This involves shifting teachers' thinking from valuing elite movement performance in traditional sports to exploring broader understandings of movement across a diverse range of contexts and exploring what successful participation in physical activity encapsulates for all of our diverse learners.